Welcome to Her Drive Podcast, a female-focused interview series with women of the world discussing their road trips to success. I'm your host, Cindy Kremblatt, a travel expert, business owner, and curious spirit with a knack for meeting fascinating women. Please join me as I hop in the passenger seat and chat with these ambitious women about what drives them, twists and turns, and those pedal to the metal moments. Let's drive. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Her Drive Podcast. I am really excited for today's interview with Dr. Carrie Johansson. She's known as the Sensible Psychologist and author of Self-Help on the Go. We're nearing the end of the year. The new year is upon us. I know we always have these goals for ourselves. And for me, self-help is always a part of those goals and encouraging self-development. So Carrie, what a great time to be having you. Welcome to Her Drive.
Thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here. And I love the concept of this podcast. I love to drive, and I also love to help people really drive their lives in the direction that they want it to go. And that's my passion. So yeah.
Fabulous. Well, Dr. Carrie, can you please kind of give us a greater description of your work that you're doing, more about your book and anything else that's really relevant to your work life as it stands right now?
Absolutely. So I'm a psychologist. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I have been in private practice for 22 years, specializing in treating anxiety and trauma. And several years ago, I just got really curious about who gets better and why. And it's not necessarily what you would think. And one of the things that I found is that the folks who are deliberate about moving forward and working with the reality that they actually have instead of waiting for reality to be exactly what they want, they're the folks who get better the fastest and the most comprehensively. And I really just wanted to start reaching more people at a time. And my clients had essentially been rejecting traditional self-help books. They would come in and they'd be like, I can't make it past 20 pages. Can you just tell me what to do the next time my boss is being a jerk? And, or the next time I'm anxious, or the next time fill in the blank. And so I wrote the book that I wrote for my clients. It's 99 tips and tricks that are all evidence-based from psychological principles that actually really work. And the tagline to the book kind of sums up my philosophy, because you're not broken, but life gets tricky sometimes. So, yeah.
Well, I now know what book I have to order. And that's really beautiful. I think so many times, at least in my own head, there's been moments where I've just felt, and I've even vocalized, I'm just so broken. I'm so damaged. There's so much wrong with me. And realistically, in my opinion, that's not exactly true. So I love that that's kind of what your book is focusing on, because life is very challenging as the little earthlings.
And, we've been selling people a total pile of horse manure, which is that if you just think hard enough, you can manifest a problem-free life. It's just simply not accurate. If you think hard enough, you can certainly be more thoughtful about how you approach life, but you can't guarantee no problems. And so because it's not realistic, people then are failing at it, and then they feel like they're failures. And so switching the self-help genre to like, how do you help yourself navigate the inevitable ups and downs? And then you have a lot more power, and it's also a lot more fun.
Very well stated. Again, just to bring it back to my journey, there's been so many times where in my past, I used to think, if I could just be perfect, if I could just be pure, if I could just get it right all the time, then my life will be perfect all the time, and was like spiritually bypassing and so jumping forward, trying to move out of my negative emotions or whatever the environment was, and like immediately get to the silver lining rather than just sitting in what was going on. And as you've stated, the reality of the environment. So when you're working with clients, how do you help the brain switch over from, if that's the case, I don't know, I could just it could just be me, but how do you get them to switch into that mindset of like troubles are going to come and you can navigate them differently?
So it's all based in a concept called psychological flexibility. And psychological flexibility sounds fancy, but it's actually really simple. It is the concept that if we accept, notice I did not say approve, accept the reality that we have, then we can do an assessment of essentially what's working well, what's working poorly, how do we feel about it, what do we want, what have we tried? And doing that assessment is different than the judgment, right? Like, oh, this isn't going well. That means I'm bad, or this is bad. And now I'm stuck and I can't do anything at all, right? Like, so that hopelessness takes over. And we want to make that intellectual shift so that you're working with your emotions instead of just clobbered by them.
Mhm.
And then you can actually, like I said, do that assessment of what's going well, what's going badly. And then from there, you can really figure out what your next best move is. So, a question I'm often asking is, how do we get real with reality? Stop railing against reality. How do we get real with reality? And then what's our next best move? And
Mhm.
sometimes our next best move is waiting. Sometimes our next best move is acknowledging that something really difficult is happening. Sometimes our next best move is going and doing something fun. So I almost always return to fun. I believe life is meant to be enjoyed, right? Because really, like, what is the point if we are not enjoying ourselves?
I concur. I am That's quite interesting. The idea of sometimes you just acknowledge that what is happening is just hard.
Yeah, because sometimes it is.
Mhm. Mhm. I had a girlfriend recently. She has her own process. She goes to therapy and does that, but she also has her own process of just internal guidance system. And I went away for the weekend on her own. And when she came back, I asked her, how was it? And she said, I got exactly what I needed. Like, great. What was the message? She said, the message is right now, things with my mom are really, really challenging. And that's all I need to know right now. So it was such a beautiful, I guess, realization of reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you're in that acceptance, again, it's not approval or disapproval, that's judgment.
Mm,
Acceptance is just what is so is so.
mhm,
Then you can figure out if you have any leverage, or if
mhm.
sometimes you need to wait, or if sometimes you actually really need to change course or do that U-turn, right?
Do you find that that takes the emotional charge out of the situation a little bit?
Absolutely. And a piece of what is fascinating about emotions is when we resist them, they tend to build. Right? Also, when we own them, right? I was recently talking to somebody and they were like, "Well, my anxiety." And I'm like, "Do you really want to claim anxiety like that? Do you want to like talk about anxiety making a hostile takeover?" Right? So then anxiety is a force coming in from outside, even if it feels like it's inside. But if it's your anxiety, that's like you're snuggling up a new puppy, right? Like we don't want to snuggle with anxiety. We want to take a look at it and decide, when is it giving us useful information, and when is it actually not giving us very useful information.
Mm,
So, and in general, with emotions, we often are inadvertently feeding them by telling ourselves we're not allowed to have that feeling, right? Well, I'm really mad, but I can't be mad because.
mm,
No, you're really mad. What's it trying to tell you?
mhm,
And sometimes we have both thoughts and emotions that arise kind of out of nowhere for no particularly good reason, and they don't really mean anything at all.
really? So what's a case where that might be?
Uh, I'll use an anxiety example. So my husband recently was going on a long road trip, and I became convinced that he was going to die on the road trip.
Mm,
Yep, I just had this thought, and then I'm all scared, and then I'm just wildly nervous, right? And me being worried about that was not going to increase or decrease the odds of him dying on the road trip.
mhm,
right?
Mhm.
The information it was giving me was a reminder about the flip side of attachment. Attachment is lovely and wonderful. And the flip side of it is that it is vulnerable,
Mhm.
right? And so, honestly, all my anxiety was really trying to tell me was to remind me that I really like my husband, which is real good news, right? We're real glad about this. We got married 2 years ago. So, and I really like my husband, and I like my life, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Mm.
And periodically, I get information, right, in the form of a feeling or in the form of an upset, right? That because I'm attached, the flip side of that is that at some point it's going to go away, and that's going to really be very painful, right?
Mhm.
So, but the anxiety really didn't have anything to do with reality.
Mhm.
Again, like the odds of him getting injured or, you know, meeting an early demise in a car crash on this road trip were not any better or worse based on my anxiety. It would just sort of came out of nowhere. By the way, he's fine. He left and came back just fine. But it was one of those things where I could have spent a lot of time and energy being really worried, and instead just kind of noticing and cradling that feeling of like, yeah, you really love your husband. You really don't want him to go away.
Mhm.
Then that sensation isn't fed, and it just kind of fades.
Mhm.
Super interesting when we label emotions instead of feeding them by either resisting them and shoving them down, which makes them grow, or by looping and looping and looping in them, which makes them grow. Instead, if you just sort of bring them up and take a look at them, take a breath, they tend to fade.
Mhm.
And the next thing you know, you'll be hungry or remember that you need to trade out the laundry or, right? Something mundane and silly will take over instead.
Mhm. Of course. And what would be the best process for someone who notices like fear? Like I'm having a lot of fear over this.
Mhm.
Um, how could they walk through that on their own?
So it's going to sound really easy and silly, but the first step is to label it. Like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm afraid.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the next step is to actually embody it. Where do you feel it in your body? Do your legs get racy? Does your stomach get twisty? Do you get tense in your chest? And then to breathe some calm into your body while you're literally looking around, and you can almost actually do like a full scan, like, oh, nope, actually, I'm pretty safe right now.
Mhm.
Right? Now, if you do a scan and you have a tiger running towards you, like, yeah, please be afraid and use it. But a lot of times we have emotions that come up and they're about a future that hasn't happened yet, or they're about a past that is already past. And so to get yourself back into that present moment looks like labeling, embodying the emotion, and then doing a safety check.
Mhm.
If you're actually safe in the moment, you can sort of settle your nervous system by inviting that safety to be more forward than whatever the either um, future or past drumbeat is in your mind.
Mhm.
Does that
Interesting.
make sense?
It certainly does. Absolutely. And what's the point of scanning the body to see where that emotion lives?
So it's one of the ways that we can get control back over our nervous systems. So also it's also interesting to take a look at where we feel things, because if we can relax the physical body, like let's say you're feeling really tense about something and the next thing you know you have your jaw really tense.
Mhm.
If you can actually notice the tension in your jaw and then deliberately relax your jaw, that actually sends a signal to your brain that the reaction that it's having of tension and bracing and threat response can soften. That's going to open up your ability to think through your options. If you are demanding that something go away, demanding that someone do something your way, Any of those sorts of responses tend to increase tension and hold tension and emotion very high. And that limits and narrows our options. So when we are soft and relaxed, we have a lot more flexibility, both physically as well as inside our brains.
Fascinating. I've
Yeah.
always felt like the body is connected to the mind, and only
Yes.
recently have I started to discover why that's true.
Yep.
Um, so, are there any like physical practices outside of like recognizing again the jaw, relaxing it, that someone can do to chill their nervous system?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to ground, which this sounds sort of cheesy, but it's actually very effective. Think about the last time that you were really riled up about something, whether you were anxious or angry or even excited, right? All of the energy tends to lift in our body and either swirl in our stomachs, in our chests, or in our heads, right? And then we get really disconnected with the lower portion of our body. And so, one of the easiest things to do, and we can do this right now, I'm assuming you're sitting. Are you sitting?
I am.
Okay, so press both feet into the ground. And if you're in a safe place, if you're listening to this podcast and you're driving, please don't close your eyes, duh. But if you are in a place where you can close your eyes, one of the old evolutionary biology tricks is to give your brain the message that it is safe enough to shut down an entire sensory system. So shutting your eyes, taking a deliberate breath. Notice I didn't say deep, just deliberate. And then press your left foot into the ground. And imagine that you are just getting the whole support of the earth underneath your feet, no matter how many stories up you are. Press your right foot into the ground. And then see if you can roll your toes. And victory here is not actually feeling all five toes. Most of the time, we feel our pinkies, kind of a clump in the middle, and then our big toe. Victory here is trying to feel all five toes. And it is just imagining, right? Like as you're doing this, you haven't even done this deliberately, but as you're doing this, notice that your weight has kind of redistributed in your body. And now you have more access to your whole body instead of just the swirl in your head or in your chest or in your stomach. And again, this just grounds, resets nervous system functioning. And then when you open your eyes, then you can look around and see what's your next best move.
Mm-hmm.
But getting present, getting in your body, and kind of putting online your whole system. So it's not just your threat response, amygdala threat response in your body. It's not just your emotions. It's not just your thoughts. It's the whole system working together, then gives you many more options. And notice it doesn't take that long. That took a little bit over a minute. I mean, you can do it in 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Magical.
And it's one of those stealth maneuvers because, like, you can be in the middle of like a really tense conference call or whatever, and you can be rolling your toes like crazy, and nobody's gonna know.
Yeah, I've never heard of the rolling the toes technique, but that is genius.
Thank you.
It'll
One of my favorite acceptance and commitment therapy therapists talked a little bit about that, and I've been really enjoying developing it as a technique.
fascinating. Yeah, it made me think, oh, my right foot I need to do some rolls there. It's not as present as the left foot.
Uh-huh.
What was presence and commitment, or what was the type of therapy you just
Acceptance and commitment therapy. It's also
mentioned?
called ACT. It's ACT, but they much prefer you to call it ACT.
I've never heard of it before. What is that?
Acceptance and commitment therapy is actually that platform of psychological flexibility. So it's working with the reality that you have, being mindful and grounded in the present moment, and figuring out what your skillful options are when you're in the middle of solving problems. It's a lovely, very comprehensive model of therapy. And I've moved through a couple of different in all of my years of practice. Um, I worked for several years before I had my doctorate and before I started my private practice. And I started out kind of in a psychodynamic, like Freudian kind of attachment theory approach to things, which was always looking at how did the past impact the present? How did the past impact the present? And I realized a major shortcoming was once you got somebody to the present, how do you then get them to move towards the type of life that they want? And tried out narrative, tried out cognitive behavioral. I really have a hard time with cognitive behavioral therapy because they're occasionally asking you to challenge negative thoughts that are actually true, right? So this notion of constantly replacing a negative thought is like sometimes negative stuff is actually happening and it's real and it's true and it's not going away. And acceptance and commitment therapy takes kind of the best of psychodynamic and narrative and CBT and puts it in a framework where, yes, of course, you're going to poke at thoughts that aren't true, but thoughts that are true, your task is to actually just deeply be in acceptance that it's true and then decide if there's something that you want to do about it. So I've just found it to be the most comprehensive of all of the theories that I have worked with, and also just the most helpful.
It certainly sounds that way. It sounds like there's a process and a system that I feel like not to discount your work, but even like at a certain point, someone could guide themselves through it in some moments in between sessions or what have you.
Absolutely.
And I'm all about hiring people, working with professionals, figuring it out. But ultimately, my goal with some things has been, okay, how can I integrate this into my life so I don't feel like I need
Yes.
to come in here every single week to lean on regarding some
Yep.
relatively, I would say, minor issue in the grand scheme of life.
And that was a big piece of why I wrote my book. First of all, I wanted to have a much more financially accessible conversation with folks who don't necessarily want to spend the time and money and energy in therapy. And a lot of those principles, the book is based on the principles of psychological flexibility and acceptance and commitment therapy. And it gives you literally 99 things to try, because you don't need to be in therapy for 10 years to get this stuff. And a lot of it is actually things that you can be putting into practice every day. I certainly do, right? Like, I always think it's fun when people are like, "Oh, well, you're a psychologist. You must communicate well all the time." I'm like, "Nope." Like, I screw it up just as often as the rest of us.
Oh no way.
Like, I practice it myself. Yeah, all of that.
Fabulous. Well, you did mention a bit of your training and where your practice has taken you, but I would love to move back in your timeline a little bit to learn more about your personal history, why you chose this work, and how it fuels you personally.
Yeah, what would you like to know? Where should I start?
Goodness. Well, I guess what's the genesis of your story? So you choose where you'd like to start. What makes sense for you?
So the story that I often tell is that when I was 14, I was a horsey kid. I was a horseback rider. I was also super tiny, like just the scrawniest kid you've ever seen. And I thought I was going to be able to be a jockey. And then at some point, probably right around age 14, I ended up being a medium-sized person instead of a teeny tiny kind of person. And being a jockey was no longer an option. But I was still very interested in horseback riding. And I had a trainer in middle school who worked with abused horses. And then when I was in high school, I was doing therapeutic horseback riding programs, and I was one of the sidewalkers. So you have a disabled kiddo on a horse, you have two walkers on either side, and then a person leading the horse. And the kiddo that we were taking care of that day, who was wheelchair bound and totally nonverbal, uh, he had a seizure on the horse.
Mm.
And something about that moment just coalesced for me that my calling in the world was to help people, particularly people who were in a position where they were going to have a hard time helping themselves. And I decided that day, actually, at 14, that I either wanted to be a social justice lawyer or I wanted to be a psychologist. And I can't really explain why, but that was the decision, right? My sweet 14-year-old brain. And then I went to college and ended up majoring in history and decided to go the law route, and graduated and went to work in a law firm and thought it was the worst job ever.
Oh no.
So I was dealing with paper all day long, all by myself and not people. And I didn't feel like whoever I was eventually going to help, I didn't have any access to them, right? And so it just was a terrible fit job for me, which was wonderful because it was so loudly terrible that it was easy to leave it. Um, and I went back to school to get the credits that I needed to apply to psychology graduate school, and have never looked back. So went and got my master's and got work experience, and then went and got my doctorate, and then started my private practice just about 6 weeks after I graduated with my doctorate.
That is so fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that you said that it was so loudly terrible that
So loudly
you had to
terrible.
leave. Like there was no resonance, it seems like
Yes.
vibrationally not a match.
Yep. And I think it's harder for us to make decisions when we're always getting positive, negative, and neutral input like 100% of the time in our lives.
Mm.
But when we're in a scenario and we're getting kind of an equal dosage of positive and negative, it makes it a lot harder to make a decision. When something's totally positive, it's like, well, duh, I want to do that. And if something's totally negative, it's really easy to be like, oh, get me out of here. But when you have something that's kind of more balanced out, that's when decision making gets a little
Mhm. I understand and relate to that. I'm sure so
harder.
many people can.
Yep.
Fascinating. And through your work, how is it that you're able, I mean, you're obviously working directly with people, and getting that feedback as people are growing, developing, shifting, but how do you personally, I don't want to use the word protect, I'll use the word protect, but how do you maintain your sense of self and energetically, emotionally, and all of that while having so many of us look to you for your guidance and teaching and a platform for us to express ourselves?
It's super important to pay attention to that. So, answering that question, I think, is critical on a daily basis for myself. And one of the most obvious is that I have my own therapist and go and talk about things. I'm also generally a lifelong learner. So, always trying to take a look at how can I be more skillful if there's a hole in my knowledge base, or there's a certain type of diagnosis or client that comes in that I'm unfamiliar with, like how do I study up so that I can be good at that, good at helping that person or that problem. I get a lot of exercise
Mm,
and try to eat well. Frankly, I try to work the program that I encourage my clients to work.
mm,
So, sleep, exercise, and nutrition are the surprisingly physical building blocks of mental health.
mm,
So, I guard my sleep. I try to eat pretty well. And I also exercise and move my body regularly. And next level up on creating a good life for yourself is, how's your connections? Are you doing meaningful work? Do you have a spiritual connection? So attending to those things, and then even some of the tiniest little things, like I have a ritual for when I'm off of work, so that work is put away. I come home and I take off my jewelry, change my clothes, and it's just a little bit of a marker of like, work is left at work.
mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
really nice.
I love all of that, but I certainly have never heard of the removing of, right? Of certain items. Like I've heard like come home when you're done interacting with people and like shower, right? So I guess
Sure.
there you would be technically making a change, but I wasn't thinking about the clothing component, but more so
Yep.
the energy that's now clinging to you. How interesting. Yeah. So that's a different segment of yourself when you come home.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
exactly.
Hmm. Well, this is my favorite question to ask. I ask everybody.
Ooh.
Comes on her drive. If you could go back in time and talk to a younger version of yourself, what age would she be, and what would you say?
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. Um, I think there's a couple of things that I would say uh, when I was younger. I felt confident about being smart, but I didn't always give myself great credit for other aspects of my life. And so I'd love to take my 20-year-old college self and just give her a hug and let her know that it was okay to be different, right? Like I was the only one of my friends in college who worked, and it just really set me apart from my peers in a way that I really appreciate the work ethic. And I really appreciated, there was a lot about being that person that I appreciated, but it also made me feel kind of isolated and like there was something wrong with me. And instead just kind of giving her a little hug and being like, you're different and that's awesome, and don't worry about it. So I think that would be a nice thing to do for my 20-year-old self. And I might also tell her to drive a little bit less fast because I had a pretty heavy right foot back at that time.
That's cute. Totally unexpected. Amazing. Oh yeah. And like now I think there's like this celebration of uniqueness and all of that. But
Yes.
I too had to work while in school, and many times I had two jobs while doing my undergrad. And I just remember looking back at people like, oh, you're just enjoying your college youth and your fun, and I have to grind. It sucks. But it does, everyone has their challenges, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So amazing. Well, what else would you like to share with the audience? You've been so beautifully articulate about your work and a bit about your life, but I don't even know what questions I have left. So anything you'd love to share would be welcomed.
I guess I feel like I'd love to give people permission. So maybe, and this goes back to what we were just talking about, like it's great to actually be yourself. And the sooner that you can figure out what your particular pattern of strengths and weaknesses is, the sooner you have more power. I keep using that word, right? Like I want to empower people to be themselves. And I also want to empower folks to live the type of life that they want. You don't have to live my life. My life isn't success for everyone by a long stretch, right? Um, so slowing down and having the courage, I'll put it in the positive, having the courage to take a look at what am I good at that I want to build? What am I good at that doesn't really make much of a difference to me? What am I not so good at that I want to build? And what am I not so good at that I can just not worry about it, right? But we tend to be so good at criticizing ourselves for our weaknesses, and we tend to not necessarily really connect with our strengths. It's always interesting to have this conversation. People either tend to be like, oh, well, yeah, but I guess it's okay, right? And they kind of shrink as they're talking, about their strengths, or they don't even understand that what is usual for them is actually unusual for other people.
Mm.
And so understanding that strength and then the utility of it is really a helpful thing. And then understanding what your weaknesses are and remembering that almost everything is actually secretly a skill.
Mm.
And if it's a skill, that means that you can learn something about it and you can improve it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if, so I often use the example a few years back, I was challenging myself to do things that I was afraid of doing, mostly just for kicks, partially because I ask my clients to do this all the time. And I am a horrible dancer. right? Just horrible. And I decided that I would take dance lessons. And so I went from horrendous to not very good. It took about a year. At which point I sort of gave it up. But it was hilarious, right? Like my dance instructor would do horrendous things like post videos on Facebook and tag you.
Oh, no.
Right? She'd video the class and then she'd post it on Facebook and then she'd tag you. And I'd just be like, who's the clunky weightlifter in the class? Oh, there I am. But it was a great exercise in like, do something that you're not good at on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And do it on purpose, make a commitment, follow through with the commitment. All of that is so good for our brains,
Mm-hmm.
even if you never end up good at it, right? Still a terrible dancer. And I chose after a year to spend my time and energy on other things. But it was a great exercise. It was a lot of fun. And it also just sort of proves that point of like, you can do things you're bad at and it's really okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Oh man. My brain's like scanning. I'm like, what can I do that I'm bad at? I love that. Well, Dr. Carrie, it was such a joy chatting with you. What a beam of light you are. And I would love for you to let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find your book. Please, Anne, thank you.
That sounds great. Selfhelponthego.com is both the name of the book and my website. And that also links to if you want me to come and speak to your team, if you want to come in for therapy, it has links to all of that, as well as links to purchase the book, which is at the moment on sale for December, which is kind of fun.
Fantastic. We love that. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience. And I look forward to reading your book.
That sounds wonderful. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Her Drive with Cindy Kramblatt. If you want to know more about today's guest or know a fascinating woman you'd love for me to interview, please see the show notes, visit Instagram or her-drive.com. And please, 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 if you love the show, leave a review on iTunes. Thanks for riding along and subscribe to join our next woman and her drive to success.